The spotlight was blinding. 16-year-old Madison Carter stood frozen at center stage, her heart hammering against her ribs as 300 pairs of eyes stared back at her from the darkened auditorium. She had dreamed of this moment for years, but never imagined it would come crashing down in the most humiliating way possible, right in front of the most powerful person in the state. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about courage, justice, and the price of standing up for what's right. Madison Carter had always been different. In a school where popularity was currency and conformity was king, she was the girl who wore vintage band t-shirts instead of designer labels, who spent lunch periods in the music room instead of the cafeteria, and who could make a violin sing in ways that brought tears to grown men's eyes. Jefferson High School in Millbrook, Connecticut, wasn't exactly known for nurturing artistic souls. The red brick building that housed nearly 2,000 students was a fortress of athletics and academics, where the marching band was barely tolerated and the drama club was treated like a necessary evil. Madison had learned to navigate these halls like a ghost, keeping her head down and her earbuds in, moving from class to class with the practiced invisibility of someone who had long ago given up trying to fit in. But Madison had a secret weapon that none of her tormentors knew about. She was extraordinary at what she did. While her classmates were posting TikTok videos and obsessing over social media followers, Madison was perfecting pieces by Bach and Vivaldi, compositions so complex that even her music teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, sometimes struggled to keep up. During their private lessons, the trouble started on a Tuesday morning in October. Madison was rushing to her locker between classes when she collided with Brittany Westfield, the undisputed queen of Jefferson High's social hierarchy. Brittany was everything Madison wasn't: blonde, beautiful, wealthy, and utterly ruthless. When it came to maintaining her position at the top of the food chain. "Watch where you're going, freak," Brittany snapped, her designer purse now scattered across the hallway floor. Her two faithful followers, Chelsea Monroe and Tiffany Brooks, immediately began gathering the spilled contents while shooting daggers at Madison with their eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you," Madison mumbled, bending down to help collect the items. It was an honest mistake, the kind that happened a dozen times a day in crowded hallways. But Madison knew from experience that logic rarely applied when dealing with Brittany Westfield. "Don't touch my stuff with your dirty hands," Brittany hissed, snatching a lipstick tube away from Madison. "God, you're such a loser. No wonder you don't have any friends." The words stung, but Madison had heard worse. She straightened up, clutching her violin case tighter, and tried to walk away. But Brittany wasn't finished. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Brittany called out, loud enough for the gathering crowd of students to hear. "What's in the case? Your lunch? I bet it's some weird healthy food your hippie mom packed for you." Madison's jaw tightened. She could handle insults about herself, but bringing her mother into it crossed a line. Elena Carter worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat after Madison's father had walked out 3 years ago. She cleaned offices at night and waited tables during the day. Also, Madison could afford violin lessons and have a chance at something better. "It's a violin," Madison said quietly, hoping to end the conversation. "A violin?" Brittany's perfectly glossed lips curved into a cruel smile. "Oh my God, you're one of those weird music nerds. Let me guess, you think you're going to be famous someday. Wake up, sweetheart. Nobody cares about your screechy little songs." The crowd of students began to murmur and laugh. Someone pulled out their phone to record what was clearly becoming a spectacle. Madison felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I just want to get to class," she said, trying to step around the group. "Not so fast," Chelsea interjected, blocking Madison's path. "I think we deserve to hear what you can do. Come on, play us a song right here in the hallway." "Yeah, Tiffany added with a nasty grin. If you're so talented, prove it. The circle of students grew larger, their expressions ranging from curious to cruel. Madison felt trapped, like a cornered animal with nowhere to run. She could feel her anxiety building, the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever she was the center of unwanted attention. I don't perform on command, Madison said, her voice barely above a whisper. What was that? Brittany cupped her ear mockingly. I couldn't hear you over the sound of your cowardice. The laughter grew louder. Madison's vision began to blur with tears she refused to let fall. She had endured 3 years of this treatment, 3 years of being treated like she was invisible or, worse, like she was a joke. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the phone cameras recording her humiliation, or maybe it was the way Brittany's eyes gleamed with sadistic pleasure, but Madison felt something snap inside her. Fine, she said, her voice stronger now, but not here. Not for you. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the taunts and jeers that followed her down the hallway. As she walked away, she heard Brittany's voice carrying above the noise. What? A freak. I almost feel sorry for her. Madison made it to the nearest bathroom before the tears came. She locked herself in a stall and let the sobs rack her body. 3 years of accumulated pain and frustration pouring out of her all at once. She had always told herself that high school was temporary, that if she could just survive until graduation, she could escape to somewhere that valued what she had to offer. But days like this made that goal feel impossibly far away. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, her eyes red and puffy, she found Mrs. Rodriguez waiting in the hallway. Madison, honey, are you okay? The music teacher asked, her voice full of concern. I heard there was some kind of incident. Madison nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying again. Come with me, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. There's something I need to tell you. They walked to the music room in silence, past the rows of empty practice rooms and the dusty piano that had seen better days. Mrs. Rodriguez closed the door behind them and gestured for Madison to sit down. I have some news, she began, her eyes bright with excitement. You know how I've been telling you about the State Arts Showcase? The one that happens every year at the Capitol Theater? Madison nodded. She had heard about the showcase, a prestigious event where the most talented high school students from across Connecticut performed for an audience of educators, arts patrons, and government officials. It was the kind of opportunity that could open doors to scholarships and conservatory programs. Well, I submitted your audition video, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. The one we recorded last month of you playing the Mendelssohn Concerto. And Madison, you've been selected to perform. Madison's eyes widened. What? You're going to perform at the Capitol Theater, in front of some of the most important people in the state. This is huge, honey. This could change everything for you. For a moment, Madison forgot all about Brittany Westfield and the humiliation in the hallway. This was what she had been working toward her entire life, the chance to show the world what she could do. But then reality set in. When is it? She asked. 3 weeks from today. Friday night. And Madison, there's something else you should know. Governor Harrison is going to be in attendance. He's the keynote speaker for the evening. Madison felt like she might faint. Governor Patricia Harrison was not only the most powerful person in Connecticut, but she was also known for her support of arts education. Her presence at the showcase would mean media attention, scouts from major conservatories, and the kind of exposure that could launch a career. I can't believe it, Madison whispered. You deserve this, Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. You have a gift, Madison. A real gift. And it's time the world saw it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of intense preparation. Madison practiced for hours every day, perfecting every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic change in her chosen piece. She had decided to perform Pachelbel's Canon in D, but arranged it in a way that showcased her technical skills while still being accessible to a general audience. At home, her mother Elena watched with pride and worry as Madison threw herself into her preparation. Elena had always supported her daughter's musical ambitions, even when money was tight and violin lessons meant choosing between groceries and gas. She understood that this performance could be Madison's ticket to a better life, but she also knew the pressure her daughter was under. "Don't forget to eat," Elena would say, bringing plates of food to Madison's room where she practiced late into the night. "Your body needs fuel to perform." "I know, Mom," Madison would reply, barely looking up from her sheet music. "Just a few more run-throughs." At school, word had spread about Madison's selection for the state showcase. The reaction was mixed. Some students, particularly those in the music program, were genuinely excited and supportive. But others, led by Brittany Westfield, saw it as another opportunity to tear Madison down. "I heard Carter thinks she's going to be famous," Brittany said loudly in the cafeteria, making sure her voice carried to Madison's table. "Someone should tell her that being good at screeching violin doesn't make you special. Maybe she'll trip and fall off the stage," Chelsea added with a laugh. "That would be hilarious." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Or maybe her violin strings will snap right in the middle of her performance," Tiffany suggested. "Can you imagine the embarrassment?" Madison tried to ignore them, but their words burrowed under her skin like splinters. She began to have nightmares about the performance going wrong, about forgetting the music or having her violin malfunction in front of hundreds of people. The closer the date got, the more anxious she became. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed the change in Madison's demeanor and pulled her aside after a particularly tense practice session. "You're overthinking this," she said. "I've watched you play this piece 100 times, and you know it better than you know your own name. Trust yourself." "What if I mess up?" Madison asked. "What if I freeze up there and can't play?" "Then you take a breath, center yourself, and begin again," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "But that's not going to happen. You were born for this, Madison. Some people spend their whole lives looking for their purpose, and you found yours at 16. Don't let fear rob you of this moment." The day of the performance arrived gray and drizzly, with autumn leaves swirling in the wind outside Madison's bedroom window. She had barely slept the night before, running through the piece in her head, over and over again. Her mother had taken the day off work to drive her to Hartford, a luxury they couldn't really afford, but one that Elena insisted on. "This is your day, Mia," Elena said as they loaded Madison's violin into the car. "I'm so proud of you already." The Capitol Theater was even more impressive than Madison had imagined. The century-old building rose from the downtown Hartford sidewalk like a monument to artistic achievement, its ornate facade and soaring columns speaking to a time when the arts were revered and celebrated. Inside, the theater was a masterpiece of red velvet and gold trim, with crystal chandeliers cast in warm light over row after row of plush seats. Madison and the other student performers were given a backstage tour and a chance to practice on the stage before the evening's performance. Standing in the wings, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with Connecticut's cultural elite, Madison felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that made her hands shake. "Deep breaths," she whispered to herself, a mantra Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her. "You belong here. You've earned this." The other performers were talented, but Madison could sense that many of them came from different worlds than she did. They had expensive instruments and professional coaches, parents who were lawyers and doctors and business executives. She overheard conversations about summer programs at prestigious conservatories and private lessons with members of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra. For a moment, Madison felt like an imposter. What was she doing here? A girl from a single-parent household who practiced in her bedroom and whose violin had been purchased secondhand from a pawn shop. But then she remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's words. Talent doesn't care about your zip code or your bank account. Either you have it or you don't. And Madison knew she had it. As the afternoon wore on, the theater began to fill with staff and volunteers, preparing for the evening's event. Madison caught glimpses of important-looking people in expensive suits, their voices carrying the confidence that came with power and influence. She wondered which one might be the governor, though she had been told that Governor Harrison wouldn't arrive until just before the performance began. The other students seemed to handle the pressure better than Madison did. They chatted easily with their parents and teachers, posed for photos, and generally appeared comfortable in the spotlight. Madison, on the other hand, found herself retreating into her shell, speaking only when spoken to and spending most of her time quietly running through fingering exercises to keep her hands limber. "You're going to do great," said a voice behind her. Madison turned to see David Chun, a pianist from East Haven who was scheduled to perform right before her. "I heard you practicing earlier. You're really good." "Thanks," Madison replied, grateful for the kindness. "You too. That Chopin piece is beautiful." "It's terrifying," David admitted with a laugh. "But the good kind of terrifying, you know. Like, this could change everything." Madison nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. This wasn't just a performance. It was an audition for the rest of her life. As evening approached, Madison's mother arrived with a small bouquet of flowers and a nervous smile. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Elena asked, smoothing Madison's hair. "Scared," Madison admitted, "but ready." "Good," Elena said. "Being scared means it matters to you. And being ready means you're going to show them what I've known all along, that you're extraordinary." The performers were given their final instructions and sent to the green room to wait for their individual call times. Madison's performance was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., about halfway through the evening's program. She would be introduced as Madison Carter, performing an original arrangement of Pachelbel's Canon in D. As she waited, Madison could hear the murmur of the audience settling into their seats, the sound of programs rustling and conversations buzzing with anticipation. Somewhere out there, Governor Harrison was taking her seat, along with education officials, arts patrons, and scouts from major music schools. Madison tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on her breathing and the feeling of her violin in her hands. At 8:25, a stagehand appeared at the green room door. "Madison Carter, you're up in 5 minutes." This was it. Madison stood up, her legs feeling unsteady, and made her way toward the stage. As she walked through the darkened backstage area, she could hear David Chun finishing his Chopin piece to enthusiastic applause. Soon, it would be her turn to step into that spotlight and show the world what she could do. She had no idea that 3 of her classmates had just entered the theater through a side door, their faces twisted with malicious intent. Brittany Westfield, Chelsea Monroe, and Tiffany Brooks had driven the hour from Millbrook to Hartford with one purpose in mind: to make sure Madison Carter's moment of triumph became her greatest humiliation. They had snuck in during the intermission, blending in with the crowd and making their way toward the backstage area while security was distracted. None of them belonged there, but they had dressed the part, conservative dresses and fake confidence that got them past the volunteers, checking tickets. As Madison waited in the wings for her introduction, she had no idea that her worst nightmare was about to come true in front of the most important audience of her life, the theater's master of ceremonies. Dr. William Thornfield stepped up to the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted dozens of these events. His voice carried clearly through the ornate auditorium as he addressed the distinguished audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, our next performer comes to us from Jefferson High School in Millbrook. She has been studying violin for 8 years and was selected for tonight's showcase based on her exceptional audition submission. Please welcome Madison Carter, performing her own arrangement of Pachelbel's Canon in D." The applause was polite, and expectant as Madison walked onto the stage, her black dress simple but elegant, her violin case in one hand and her bow in the other. The spotlight was even brighter than she had imagined during rehearsal, creating a pool of white light that seemed to separate her from the rest of the world. Governor Patricia Harrison sat in the third row center, flanked by her security detail and several members of her cabinet. At 52, she commanded respect with her silver hair and sharp business suit, but her expression was warm as she watched the young performer take her place center stage. The governor had built her political career on education reform and believed deeply in the power of the arts to transform lives. Beside her sat Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the state's Secretary of Education, along with representatives from Yale School of Music, the Hartford Conservatory, and the Connecticut Arts Council. These were the people who could change Madison's life with a single recommendation letter for scholarship offer. Madison positioned herself under the lights, adjusted her shoulder rest, and raised her violin to her chin. For a moment, the entire theater fell silent, that magical hush that comes before a performance when anything seems possible. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, but instead of terror, she felt a strange sense of calm settling over her. This was what she had been born to do. She drew her bow across the strings, and the first notes of Pachelbel's canon floated through the theater like liquid gold. But this wasn't the traditional version that everyone knew from weddings and graduation ceremonies. Madison had taken the Baroque masterpiece and reimagined it, adding her own flourishes and interpretations, while respecting the integrity of the original composition. The melody began simply, as Pachelbel had intended. But as Madison progressed through her arrangement, she began to layer in harmonies and counter melodies that she played by quickly shifting between strings. Her technique was flawless, her intonation perfect, and her musical interpretation showed a maturity far beyond her 16 years. In the audience, Governor Harrison leaned forward in her seat, genuinely impressed. She had attended dozens of student performances over the years, and while most were competent, few showed this level of artistry. The girl on stage wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story, painting emotions in sound that resonated in the listener's chest. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez whispered to the governor. "She's entirely self-taught except for school lessons." "That's what her application said," the governor replied quietly. "From a single-parent household, practicing at home, bought her instrument secondhand. This is exactly why we fight for arts funding in public schools." Madison was 3 minutes into her 8-minute piece when she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. At first she thought it might be a stagehand or photographer, so she didn't let it break her concentration. But as the figures moved closer to the stage, a chill of recognition ran down her spine. Brittany Westfield emerged from the wings, followed closely by Chelsea and Tiffany. They had somehow made it past security and were now standing just off stage, their faces twisted with malicious glee. Madison's bow wavered slightly as she saw them, but she forced herself to continue playing. She was in the middle of the most important performance of her life. She couldn't let them ruin it, but Brittany had no intention of letting Madison finish. Well, Brittany called out, her voice cutting through the beautiful music. Like a knife, look who thinks she's a star now. The audience stirred uncomfortably. Governor Harrison frowned and turned to her security chief, who was already moving toward the stage. But the girls were moving fast, and they had the element of surprise. "You really think you're special, don't you, Carter?" Chelsea added, stepping onto the stage itself now. "All these fancy people came to see you embarrass yourself." Madison tried to keep playing, but her concentration was shattered. The beautiful melody began to falter as panic set in. She could hear murmurs from the audience, see people standing up to get a better view of what was happening. This was her nightmare come to life. "Stop," she whispered, her bow still moving across the strings but producing increasingly discordant sounds. "Please just stop. What was that?" Tiffany cupped her ear mockingly, just as Brittany had done in the school hallway weeks ago. I can't hear you over the sound of your pathetic screeching. Governor Harrison was on her feet now, along with Dr. Martinez and several other officials. Security personnel were moving toward the stage, but they were still 30 feet away when Brittany made her move. Let's see how good you really are, Brittany snarled, and she lunged forward, pushing Madison hard in the chest. Madison stumbled backward, trying to maintain her balance while protecting her violin. But her heel caught on the edge of the stage platform, and she fell, tumbling off the raised performance area and landing hard on the orchestra pit below. The crash echoed through the theater like a gunshot. Madison's violin flew from her hands, striking the edge of a music stand before clattering to the floor. The bow snapped in half as she landed on it, and Madison herself let out a cry of pain as her left wrist took the brunt of her fall. The entire theater was frozen in shock. Then chaos erupted. Security personnel rushed the stage, tackling all 3 girls before they could flee. Governor Harrison was on her feet, her face a mask of fury as she watched paramedics rush toward the orchestra pit. Dr. Martinez was already on her phone, calling for additional medical assistance and a full investigation. Get those girls out of here, the governor ordered her security chief. And I want to know how they got past every checkpoint we set up. Madison lay in the orchestra pit, cradling her injured wrist and staring at the remains of her violin. The instrument that had been her constant companion for 8 years, the tool through which she expressed her deepest emotions, was destroyed. One side was completely caved in, the strings hanging loose like broken dreams. Don't move, sweetheart, said one of the paramedics as he knelt beside her. We need to check you for injuries before we move you. My violin, Madison whispered, tears streaming down her face. They broke my violin. We'll worry about that later, the paramedic said gently. Right now, let's make sure you're okay. But Madison knew she wasn't okay. She would never be okay again. The most important moment of her life had been destroyed by the same people who had made her high school years a living hell. Worse, it had happened in front of hundreds of people, including the governor and every important figure in Connecticut's arts community. She was ruined. Finished before she had even really begun, Governor Harrison appeared at the edge of the orchestra pit, her expression soft with concern. How is she? She asked the paramedic. Possible wrist fracture, some bruising, but nothing life-threatening, he replied. She's more shaken up than anything else. The governor nodded and then did something unexpected. She climbed down into the orchestra pit, her expensive suit and heels be damned, and knelt beside Madison. I'm Governor Harrison, she said quietly. And I want you to know that what just happened is not your fault. Madison looked up at her through tear-blurred eyes, unable to speak. I heard you playing before those girls interrupted, the governor continued. You have extraordinary talent. This incident doesn't change that. But everyone saw, Madison managed to whisper. Everyone saw me fail. What everyone saw, Governor Harrison said firmly, was a talented young woman being assaulted by 3 criminals who will face the full consequences of their actions. You didn't fail, Madison. You were the victim of a crime. As the paramedics carefully helped Madison to her feet and began to escort her toward the ambulance that had been called, Governor Harrison turned to her security chief. I want a full investigation, she said, her voice cold with anger. I want to know how those girls got past security, and I want to know everything about what led to this incident. And I want it tonight. Yes, ma'am, the security chief replied. We're already pulling surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses. Meanwhile, Brittany, Chelsea, and Tiffany found themselves in police custody, their evening of malicious fun having taken a very serious turn. They were led out of the theater in handcuffs, past an audience that watched in stunned silence. The gravity of what they had done was beginning to sink in, and the smug expressions they had worn while tormenting Madison were rapidly being replaced by fear. "This is so unfair," Brittany whined as she was placed in the back of a police cruiser. "It was just a joke. We didn't mean for her to get hurt." "Tell it to the judge," replied Officer Maria Santos, who had responded to the call. "You just assaulted a minor in front of hundreds of witnesses, including the governor. This isn't going away with a slap on the wrist." Back in the theater, Dr. Thornfield had taken the stage to address the audience. His usual composure was shaken as he tried to find the right words for an unprecedented situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to the unfortunate incident we've just witnessed, we'll be taking an extended intermission while we ensure everyone's safety and well-being. We ask for your patience and understanding during this difficult time." But many in the audience weren't ready to simply move on. Governor Harrison had returned to her seat, but she was clearly disturbed by what she had witnessed. She turned to Dr. Martinez with a determined expression. "I want to know everything about that girl," she said. "Her background, her school situation, what led to this. And I want to know about those 3 who attacked her. This didn't happen in a vacuum." Dr. Martinez was already making calls, reaching out to the Connecticut Department of Education to begin gathering information about Jefferson High School and the students involved. What she would discover over the next few hours would shock even the experienced. Education officials. At Millbrook General Hospital, Madison sat in an emergency room bed while a doctor examined her wrist. The X-rays showed a hairline fracture. That would require a cast, but more concerning to the medical staff was her emotional state. She had barely spoken since arriving, staring blankly at the wall while her mother held her good hand. Elena Carter was devastated. She had watched her daughter's dreams crumble in real time, seen the light go out of Madison's eyes as her violin was destroyed, and her moment of triumph turned into a nightmare. "Mia, talk to me," Elena pleaded. "Tell me what you're thinking." "It's over," Madison said flatly. "Everything I worked for, everything I dreamed of. It's all over." "No, it's not," Elena said firmly. "This is a setback, not an ending. You're stronger than this." But Madison couldn't see past the immediate devastation. Her violin was destroyed, her reputation was ruined, and she would have to return to Jefferson High School and face the same people who had always seen her as a target. The scholarship opportunities that might have come from tonight's performance were gone, and with them, any chance of escaping the life that had trapped her mother. She was 16 years old, and she felt like her life was already over. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the emergency room physician treating Madison, had been watching the news coverage of the incident at the theater. As someone who had struggled through her own difficult adolescence, she felt a deep sympathy for the young musician. "Madison," she said gently as she finished applying the cast to her wrist, "I know tonight feels like the end of the world. But I want you to remember something. Your talent hasn't been damaged. Your dreams haven't been destroyed. What happened tonight was terrible, but it doesn't define you or your future." Madison looked at her with hollow eyes. "You don't understand. That was my one chance. Nobody's going to remember my music now. They'll only remember that I was the girl who got pushed off the stage. Maybe," Dr. Walsh admitted. "Or maybe they'll remember you as the girl who had the courage to get back up." But Madison wasn't ready to hear about courage or getting back up. All she could think about was the sound of her violin hitting the floor, the sight of its broken body lying among the scattered sheet music, and the knowledge that the 3 people who hated her most had succeeded in destroying the thing that mattered to her more than anything else in the world. As the night wore on and the initial shock began to fade, Madison would discover that her story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because Governor Harrison was not the type of person to let an injustice slide, and what had happened at the Capitol Theater that night would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just Madison's life, but the lives of everyone involved. The question was whether Madison would be strong enough to seize the opportunities that were coming her way. or whether the trauma of this night would silence her music forever. The next morning, Madison woke up in her own bed with her left arm in a cast and a pounding headache that had nothing to do with her physical injuries. For a blissful moment, she thought the previous night might have been a nightmare. Then she saw the local newspaper lying on her nightstand, and reality came crashing back. "Student assaulted at State Arts Showcase," read the headline in bold letters, accompanied by a grainy photo of Madison being helped into an ambulance. Her mother had clearly tried to hide the paper, but Madison found 3 more copies stacked on the kitchen counter when she went downstairs. Elena was on the phone in the living room. Her voice strained as she spoke to someone Madison couldn't identify. "No, we're not interested in giving any interviews right now. My daughter needs time to heal." "Yes, I understand it's a big story. No comment." The calls had been coming in since 6 in the morning. Local news stations, newspapers, even some national outlets had picked up the story of the talented teenager who was attacked during her performance for the governor. Madison's phone had been buzzing constantly with messages from classmates, most of them expressing shock and sympathy, but some disturbingly gleeful about her public humiliation. "Mom, make it stop," Madison said, sinking into a kitchen chair. "I can't handle this." Elena hung up the phone and immediately wrapped her daughter in a gentle hug, careful not to jostle her injured arm. "I know, Mia. I know this is hard. But maybe some good can come from this attention." "Good. Mom, I'm a laughingstock. Everyone's going to remember me as the girl who couldn't even finish a song without getting pushed around by bullies." Before Elena could respond, their doorbell rang. Through the front window, they could see a black SUV parked in their driveway, along with 2 state police cruisers. Elena's eyes widened as she recognized the official government plates. "Madison," she whispered, "I think that's the governor." Indeed, Governor Patricia Harrison stood on their front porch, flanked by 2 security agents and Dr. Martinez. She was dressed more casually than the night before, but her presence was no less commanding. Elena smoothed her hair nervously before opening the door. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Governor Harrison. I hope you don't mind the unannounced visit, but I wanted to check on Madison and discuss what happened last night." Elena stammered an invitation inside, suddenly conscious of their modest home with its second-hand furniture and worn carpets. But Governor Harrison seemed completely at ease as she settled into their living room, her attention focused entirely on Madison. "How are you feeling this morning?" the governor asked gently. Madison shrugged, not trusting herself to speak without crying. The cast on her arm felt heavy and foreign, a constant reminder of the previous night's disaster. "I can only imagine how difficult this must be," Governor Harrison continued. "But I want you to know that what those girls did was completely unacceptable, and they will face serious consequences for their actions." "What kind of consequences?" Elena asked, taking a protective seat next to her daughter. Dr. Martinez opened a folder she had been carrying. "All 3 girls have been charged with assault, criminal trespass, and disrupting a public event. Given that this happened in front of hundreds of witnesses, including state officials, the prosecutors are taking this very seriously. They're looking at potential jail time, hefty fines, and permanent criminal records." Madison looked up for the first time since the governor had arrived. Jail time? Brittany Westfield, as the primary aggressor, could face up to 2 years in juvenile detention, Dr. Martinez explained. The other 2 are looking at shorter sentences, but all 3 will have criminal records that could affect their college applications, job prospects, and future opportunities. For a moment, Madison felt a flicker of satisfaction. After years of torment, her tormentors were finally facing real consequences. But the feeling quickly faded as she realized it didn't change anything for her. Her violin was still broken, her performance was still ruined, and her dreams were still in pieces. Governor Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. "I know that doesn't undo what happened to you last night, but there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." She leaned forward, her expression intense. "Madison, in all my years of attending student performances, I have rarely heard talent like yours. Those 3 minutes you played before you were interrupted were extraordinary. You have a gift that shouldn't be wasted because of what 3 troubled individuals did to you." "But it doesn't matter now," Madison said quietly. "Everyone who was there last night, all the people who could have helped me get into a good music school or offered scholarships, they're not going to remember my music. They're only going to remember the disaster." "That's where you're wrong," Governor Harrison said with a slight smile. "Dr. Martinez, would you share what we learned this morning?" Dr. Martinez pulled out her phone and showed Madison a series of screenshots. "These are from social media, news websites, and music forums. The story has spread nationally, but look at what people are saying." Madison read the comments with growing amazement. Instead of mocking her for being pushed off stage, people were praising her talent and expressing outrage at what had been done to her. Classical music enthusiasts were sharing clips of her performance that someone had recorded on their phone, calling her remarkable and a true artist. Professional musicians were weighing in, saying that the brief portion of her performance they had heard showed exceptional skill and musicality. "There's more," Dr. Martinez continued. "We've been contacted by representatives from Juilliard, Curtis Institute, Yale School of Music, and the New England Conservatory. They all want to hear you play. Several have already offered to arrange auditions, regardless of your family's financial situation." Madison stared at the phone screen, unable to process what she was seeing. "But my violin." "Which brings me to the main reason for my visit," Governor Harrison said. She nodded to one of her security agents, who stepped outside and returned carrying a sleek black case. "This belonged to my grandmother, Margaret Harrison. She was a violinist with the Hartford Symphony Orchestra in the 1940s and 50s. When she passed away, she left it to me with instructions that it should go to a young musician who would truly appreciate its potential." She opened the case to reveal a stunning violin that practically glowed under the living room lights. The wood was a rich, warm brown with intricate grain patterns, and even Madison could tell from across the room that this was an instrument worth more than her family's car. "This is a 1924 Heinrich Roth violin," Governor Harrison explained. "It's valued at around $40,000, but its musical value is immeasurable. My grandmother played it for 30 years, and it has the most beautiful, resonant tone. I've been waiting for the right person to inherit it, and after hearing you play last night, I know that person is you." Madison's eyes filled with tears. As she stared at the instrument, "I can't accept this. It's too much." "Madison," Alina said softly, "listen to what the governor is saying." "I'm not just giving you a violin," Governor Harrison continued. "I'm investing in your future. But there are conditions. You have to promise me that you'll continue your music education, that you'll apply to those conservatories that want to hear you play, and that you won't let what happened last night define the rest of your life." Madison looked from the violin to her mother to the governor, her mind reeling. 24 hours ago, she had thought her life was over. Now she was being offered opportunities she had never dreamed possible. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez added. "We've been investigating the situation at Jefferson High School, and what we've found is deeply troubling. The bullying you've experienced isn't isolated. There are dozens of other students who have reported similar treatment from the same group. The school administration has consistently failed to address these issues, despite multiple complaints from students and parents." Governor Harrison's expression grew stern. "As a result, I'm ordering a full review of Jefferson High School's policies and procedures. The principal, Mr. Robert Vaughn, has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Several teachers and administrators who ignored reports of bullying are also under review." Madison had never liked Principal Vaughn, who had always seemed more interested in the school's football team than in protecting students like her. The idea that he might face consequences for years of looking the other way felt surreal. But most importantly, Governor Harrison continued, I want to offer you an alternative to returning to Jefferson High School. There's a performing arts academy in Hartford, the Connecticut Academy for the Arts. It's a public school, so there would be no tuition, but it's selective and focused on nurturing talented students like yourself. If you're interested, I can arrange for you to audition next week. Madison felt like she was in a dream. The Connecticut Academy for the Arts was legendary among music students in the state. She had never even considered applying, because she assumed her family couldn't afford the application fees and audition costs. The academy has a full orchestra, individual practice rooms, and teachers who are professional musicians, Dr. Martinez explained. Students there go on to top conservatories and music schools around the country. It would be a completely different environment from what you've experienced at Jefferson. Elena squeezed her daughter's good hand. What do you think? Mia, for the first time since the previous night, Madison felt a spark of hope. Maybe her story wasn't over. Maybe this disaster could become the beginning of something better. I'd like to try, she said quietly. I'd like to audition for the academy. Governor Harrison smiled, the first genuine smile Madison had seen from her. Excellent. Dr. Martinez will arrange everything. And Madison, I want you to know that what happened last night has sparked a statewide conversation about bullying in schools. Your experience, as terrible as it was, is going to help other students who are facing similar situations. After the governor and Dr. Martinez left, Madison spent the afternoon getting acquainted with her new violin. The Heinrich Roth was unlike anything she had ever played. Where her old instrument had required effort and force to produce a good tone, this violin seemed to sing at the slightest touch. The sound was rich and complex, with overtones that seemed to shimmer in the air. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway as Madison played simple scales and exercises, relearning the feel of the instrument against her shoulder, even with her left arm in a cast, limiting her fingering ability. The music that emerged was hauntingly beautiful. It sounds like it was made for you, Elena said. Madison paused in her playing. Mom, what if I'm not good enough? What if last night was just a fluke, and I can't live up to everyone's expectations? Then you keep practicing until you are good enough, Elena replied. But Mia, I've been listening to you play for 8 years. Last night wasn't a fluke. You have something special. Something that can't be taught or faked. Trust yourself. That evening, as Madison practiced quietly in her room, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, she worried it might be another reporter or someone wanting to discuss the incident. But when she opened the message, she found something unexpected. Hi Madison, this is David Chin. I was the pianist who performed right before you last night. I wanted you to know that those 3 minutes you played were the most beautiful thing I heard all evening. I hope you don't let what happened stop you from sharing your gift with the world. You're incredibly talented, and the music community needs voices like yours. More messages followed throughout the evening. Students from other schools who had been at the showcase, professional musicians who had seen the news coverage, even some international supporters who had found her story online. All of them expressing the same sentiment. Her talent was undeniable, and she shouldn't let anyone silence her music. Madison found herself crying as she read the messages, but for the first time in 24 hours, they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. She had spent so many years feeling isolated and misunderstood, believing that no one cared about her music or her dreams. Now she was discovering that there was an entire community of people who valued what she had to offer. As she prepared for bed, Madison thought about the choice ahead of her. She could retreat into herself, let the trauma of the previous night define her future, and give up on the dreams that had sustained her through years of difficulties. Or she could take the opportunities being offered to her, step into an uncertain but promising future, and prove to herself and the world that she was stronger than the people who had tried to break her. The Heinrich Roth violin sat in its case on her dresser, waiting for tomorrow's practice session. Somewhere in Hartford, the Connecticut Academy for the Arts was preparing for her audition. And in a juvenile detention center across town, 3 former classmates were beginning to understand the real consequences of their actions. Madison Carter was about to discover that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can become the catalysts for our greatest triumphs. But first, she would have to find the courage to pick up her violin and play again. 3 weeks after the incident at the Capitol Theater, Madison stood outside the imposing glass and brick facade of the Connecticut Academy for the Arts, her new violin case clutched in her good hand. Her cast had been replaced with a removable brace that allowed her more flexibility. Though her wrist still aches when she plays for extended periods, the Academy was everything she had imagined and more. Students walked the hallways carrying instrument cases, dance bags, and art portfolios, their conversations peppered with technical terms about music theory, choreography, and visual composition. These weren't students who looked at her strangely for caring about her art. These were her people, even if she had never met them before. Professor Sarah Chun, the violin instructor and head of the strings department, greeted Madison in the main office. She was a petite woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Madison Carter," she said with a warm smile. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. I attended the showcase that night, and despite the circumstances, what I heard was remarkable." Madison felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you, Professor Chun. I'm still learning to play with this brace, so I hope my audition goes okay. We'll work with whatever limitations you have," Professor Chun assured her. "Talent doesn't disappear because of a temporary injury. Now, are you ready to show us what you can do?" The audition room was a small concert hall with perfect acoustics and warm lighting. Madison had prepared 3 pieces: a Bach partita that showcased her technical precision, a Vivaldi concerto that demonstrated her musicality, and her own arrangement of a contemporary piece that revealed her creativity and modern sensibility. As she began to play, Madison felt the familiar transformation that occurred whenever she truly connected with her instrument. The Heinrich Roth violin responded to her touch like a living thing, producing tones so pure and resonant that they seemed to hang in the air long after the bow had left the strings. Despite the slight stiffness in her wrist, her fingers moved with confidence and grace across the fingerboard. The panel of judges, Professor Chun, the Academy's director Dr. Marcus Webb, and visiting artist-in-residence Dmitry Volkov, listened with growing amazement. They had heard hundreds of auditions over the years, but this 16-year-old girl from a small suburban town was producing music that rivaled advanced college students. When Madison finished her final piece, the room fell silent for a long moment. Then Dr. Webb leaned forward with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Madison, in 30 years of music education, I have rarely encountered raw talent of this caliber. You have an intuitive understanding of musical phrasing and emotional expression that can't be taught. It simply exists within you." Professor Chun nodded enthusiastically. "Your technical skills are already quite advanced, but more importantly, you have something that many professional musicians struggle to develop: the ability to tell a story through your instrument. Every note you play has intention and meaning." Dmitry Volkov, a renowned violinist who had performed with orchestras around the world, had remained quiet during the other judges' comments. Now he spoke with his slight Russian accent. "Young lady, I have heard many promising students over the years. Most have excellent technique but lack soul. You have both. With proper training and guidance, you could have a career as a professional musician if you choose that path." Madison felt tears welling up in her eyes. But for the first time in weeks, they were tears of joy rather than pain. These weren't words of sympathy or encouragement. These were honest assessments from respected professionals who had nothing to gain by lying to her. "Does this mean?" Madison began. "Welcome to the Connecticut Academy for the Arts," Dr. Webb said with a grin. "We'd like you to start next semester, which begins in January. That gives you time to fully heal and prepare for the transition." After the audition, Professor Chun walked Madison through the Academy's facilities. The music wing was a marvel of modern educational design, with soundproof practice rooms, a professional recording studio, and a concert hall that hosted regular performances by students and visiting artists. The library contained thousands of scores and recordings, including rare manuscripts and first editions that Madison had only dreamed of seeing. "This will be your practice room," Professor Chin said, opening the door to a small but well-appointed space with excellent acoustics. "Every student gets their own room with 24-hour access. You can practice whenever inspiration strikes." Madison ran her fingers along the piano that occupied one corner of the room. To have a space like this, where she could explore her music without worrying about disturbing neighbors or dealing with interruptions, felt like a luxury beyond imagination. "Professor Chen," Madison said hesitantly, "I have to ask, is this really happening? 3 weeks ago, I thought my music career was over before it started. Now I'm being offered opportunities I never dreamed possible. It feels too good to be true." Professor Chun sat down at the piano bench and gestured for Madison to take the chair beside her. "Madison, I want to tell you something that I hope you'll remember throughout your musical journey. Talent is a gift, but it's what you do with that gift that determines your success. You've been given an extraordinary ability to create beauty through music. What happened at the showcase was terrible, but it also revealed your character. You didn't give up. You didn't let those who wanted to silence you succeed. That resilience is just as important as your technical skills." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "I won't lie to you, the path of a professional musician is difficult. There will be rejections, failures, and moments when you question whether you're good enough. But if you maintain the passion and determination I saw in your audition today, you can overcome any obstacle." Meanwhile, across town at Jefferson High School, the aftermath of the showcase incident was still reverberating through the hallways. Principal Vaughn had been permanently removed from his position after the state investigation revealed a pattern of ignoring bullying complaints and failing to protect vulnerable students. The new interim principal, Dr. Angela Rodriguez, had immediately implemented a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and created new reporting mechanisms for students who felt unsafe. The 3 students who had attacked Madison were facing their own consequences. Brittany Westfield, as the ringleader, had been sentenced to 6 months in juvenile detention, followed by 2 years of community service. Her college applications, which had once seemed guaranteed to result in acceptance to prestigious universities, were now complicated by her criminal record. Chelsea Monroe and Tiffany Brooks received shorter sentences but faced similar long-term consequences. Their families had hired expensive lawyers, but the incident had been too public and too well documented for legal maneuvering to be effective. They would spend the rest of their high school years dealing with the repercussions of their actions. More importantly, their attack on Madison had sparked a broader conversation about bullying in Connecticut schools. Governor Harrison had used the incident to push through new legislation, requiring schools to implement comprehensive anti-bullying programs and provide better support for students pursuing arts education. The Madison Carter Act, as it came to be known, allocated additional funding for music and arts programs in public schools and created new pathways for talented students to access advanced training regardless of their family's economic situation. Madison had become an unwitting symbol of both the destructive power of bullying and the transformative potential of supporting young artists. Mrs. Rodriguez, Madison's former music teacher at Jefferson High, had followed her student's journey with pride and amazement. She visited Madison at home one afternoon, bringing sheet music and updates from the school's music program. "I have to admit," Mrs. Rodriguez said as they sat in Madison's living room, "when I first submitted your audition video for the showcase, I hoped it might lead to a scholarship or two. I never imagined it would result in all of this." Madison carefully tuned the Heinrich Roth violin, still marveling at its responsiveness. "I keep wondering what would have happened if those girls hadn't shown up that night. Would anyone have really noticed my performance?" "Madison, you can't think that way," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "Your talent would have been recognized regardless. Yes, the incident brought you attention, but not the kind that helps a musical career. What got you into the academy, what impressed those judges, was your ability and artistry. The Heinrich Roth violin is beautiful, but it's only as good as the musician playing it." Alina Carter, who had been listening from the kitchen, joined them in the living room. The past month had been transformative for their entire family. The stress and worry that had dominated Elena's life since her husband left had been replaced by excitement and hope for her daughter's future. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Elena said, "I wanted to thank you for believing in Madison when no one else did. If you hadn't encouraged her to audition for the showcase... I was just doing my job, Mrs. Rodriguez replied modestly. Madison had the talent. I just helped her find the stage to display it. As November turned to December, Madison threw herself into preparation for her transition to the academy. She practiced 4 to 5 hours a day, building up her stamina and working through the advanced repertoire that Professor Chun had recommended. The Heinrich Roth violin had revealed new dimensions to pieces she thought she knew well, allowing her to explore subtleties of tone and expression that her old instrument could never have produced. She also began taking online courses to supplement her general education, ensuring she would be ready for the Academy's rigorous academic requirements. The school combined serious arts training with college preparatory academics, expecting students to excel in both areas. One afternoon, while practicing a particularly challenging Paganini caprice, Madison received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified herself as Jennifer Walsh, a representative from the Aspen Music Festival and school. "Madison, we heard about your situation and your acceptance to the Connecticut Academy for the Arts," Ms. Walsh said. "We'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer program next year. It's an intensive 8-week program where you'd study with world-class instructors and perform with other exceptional young musicians." Madison nearly dropped her violin. The Aspen Music Festival was one of the most prestigious summer programs in the world, typically accessible only to students who could afford the substantial tuition and living expenses. "I don't understand," Madison said. "How did you even know about me?" "Your audition for the Academy was recorded, and Professor Chun shared it with several of us in the classical music community," Ms. Walsh explained. "We've also been following your story since the showcase incident. You represent exactly the kind of passionate, dedicated young artist we want to support." As Madison hung up the phone, she realized that her life had become something she barely recognized. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely, bullied teenager whose biggest dream was simply to finish high school without further humiliation. Now, she was being courted by elite music institutions and offered opportunities that could shape her entire future. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. The girl who had once tried to make herself invisible in the hallways of Jefferson High was gone, replaced by someone who was beginning to understand her own worth and potential. Madison was learning that talent, when combined with perseverance and the right opportunities, could overcome almost any obstacle. As she prepared for her final weeks at Jefferson High before transferring to the Academy, Madison reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. The attack at the showcase had been intended to destroy her, but instead, It had become the catalyst for everything she had ever wanted. She thought about Brittany, Chelsea, and Tiffany, serving their sentences and dealing with the consequences of their actions. Part of her felt sorry for them. They were so consumed with tearing others down that they had destroyed their own futures in the process. But mostly, she felt grateful that their cruelty had been exposed and that other students would be protected from similar treatment. Madison Carter was no longer the victim of their story. She was the author of her own narrative, and she was just beginning to write the opening chapters of what promised to be an extraordinary life. 2 years had passed since that fateful night at the Capitol Theater, and Madison Carter stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City, adjusting the shoulder rest on her Heinrich Roth violin. At 18, she had grown into her talent with a confidence that would have been unimaginable to her 16-year-old self. The Connecticut Academy for the Arts had transformed her from a promising student into a polished artist. Under Professor Chun's guidance, she had mastered advanced techniques, expanded her repertoire to include contemporary works, and developed her own distinctive musical voice. Her summers at Aspen had connected her with musicians from around the world and opened doors to opportunities she was still discovering. Tonight, she was the featured soloist with the Hartford Youth Symphony, performing the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto in front of a sold-out audience that included many familiar faces from her journey. Governor Harrison sat in the front row, beaming with pride, next to Elena Carter, who had tears streaming down her face before the performance had even begun. Dr. Martinez and Mrs. Rodriguez were there, along with Professor Chen and the entire faculty from the Academy. Even David Chun, now studying piano at Juilliard, had come to support her. But perhaps the most meaningful presence was that of Dr. Walsh from the emergency room, who had reminded Madison on the worst night of her life that her talent hadn't been damaged. As Madison walked onto the stage, the applause was thunderous. She had performed this same concerto at her Juilliard audition 6 months earlier, earning acceptance with a full scholarship that would allow her to continue her studies at the highest level. But tonight felt different. This was a homecoming, a celebration of how far she had traveled from that broken girl in the orchestra pit. The opening notes of the Mendelssohn soared through the concert hall with a clarity and emotional depth that silenced every whisper in the audience. Madison had learned to channel her experiences, both painful and triumphant, into her music, creating performances that resonated on multiple levels. The technical brilliance was still there, but now it was infused with wisdom earned through adversity and growth. During the second movement, as her violin sang a melody of heartbreaking beauty, Madison caught sight of Governor Harrison dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. This was the same woman who had knelt beside her in an orchestra pit and promised that her story wasn't over. That promise had been kept in ways neither of them could have imagined. The concerto concluded with a flourish that brought the entire audience to its feet. Madison stood at center stage, her violin at her side, and looked out at the faces of the people who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. This moment, standing ovation, flowers thrown from the balcony, calls for an encore, was everything she had dreamed of as a child practicing alone in her bedroom. But perhaps more importantly, it represented something deeper, the triumph of resilience over cruelty, of community support over individual destruction, and of talent nurtured over talent silenced out. After the performance, Governor Harrison hosted a reception at the governor's mansion, bringing together everyone who had played a role in Madison's remarkable journey. The conversation was lively and warm, filled with stories of Madison's growth and plans for her future. "You know," Governor Harrison said during her toast, "when I first met Madison, she was convinced her story was ending. What we've witnessed tonight proves that sometimes our greatest challenges become the foundation for our greatest achievements." Elena Carter, elegant in a new dress purchased specifically for the occasion, spoke about watching her daughter transform from a frightened teenager into a confident young woman who knew her worth. Madison taught me that dreams don't have expiration dates, she said. No matter how impossible they seem, if you keep working toward them, the universe has a way of opening doors you never knew existed. Mrs. Rodriguez, now retired from teaching, but still following her former students' careers, shared her memories of first recognizing Madison's exceptional talent. I've taught hundreds of students over the years, she said, but Madison reminded me why music education matters. When we nurture artistic gifts, we're not just creating performers, we're developing human beings who can touch other people's souls. Professor Chun spoke about the transformation she had witnessed during Madison's time at the academy. Madison arrived as a technically skilled student with enormous potential, she said. But she's leaving us as a complete artist, who understands that music is a conversation between the performer and the audience. That's a rare gift. As the evening wound down, Madison found herself in a quiet moment with Governor Harrison in the mansion's music room. "I have something to tell you," the governor said with a mysterious smile. "Remember how I mentioned that the Heinrich Roth violin should go to someone who would appreciate its potential?" Madison nodded, running her fingers along the instruments. "Elegant curves. My grandmother would have loved hearing you play tonight," Governor Harrison continued. "But there's something else she would have appreciated even more, the young woman you've become. You've used your gifts not just for personal success, but to inspire others and advocate for arts education. That's exactly the legacy she hoped her violin would create." "I'll never be able to repay you for what you've done for me," Madison said softly. "You already have," Governor Harrison replied. "Every time you perform, every time you inspire another young musician, every time you prove that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle, you're repaying not just me, but everyone who believes in the power of the arts to transform lives." The following week, as Madison prepared to leave for New York and her freshman year at Juilliard, she made one final stop at Jefferson High School. The building looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. Dr. Rodriguez had implemented comprehensive reforms that had transformed the school culture, and the music program had been significantly expanded thanks to funding from the Madison Carter Act. Madison performed for the current students, many of whom knew her story but had never heard her play. As she played pieces from her Carnegie Hall performance, she watched faces in the audience transform with wonder and possibility. After the performance, several students approached her with questions about pursuing music seriously. "The most important thing to remember," Madison told them, "is that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. If you have a gift, if you have a passion, don't let anyone convince you to give it up. Find people who believe in you, work harder than you think you can, and never underestimate the power of perseverance." One student, a shy sophomore who reminded Madison of her younger self, asked about dealing with people who didn't understand her dedication to music. "Some people will always try to diminish what they don't understand," Madison replied. "But for every person who tries to tear you down, there will be others who want to lift you up. Focus on finding your tribe, the people who see your potential and want to help you reach it." As for Brittany, Chelsea, and Tiffany, their paths had diverged dramatically from Madison's upward trajectory. Brittany had served her full sentence and was now attending community college, struggling with the long-term consequences of her actions. Her dreams of attending an elite university had evaporated along with her reputation. Chelsea and Tiffany had similar struggles, finding that their moment of cruelty had defined them in ways they never anticipated. Madison had occasionally wondered about them over the past 2 years, but without anger or desire for revenge. Their actions had inadvertently set in motion the chain of events that led to her current success, and she had learned that holding on to resentment only poisoned the person carrying it. Standing in her childhood bedroom one last time before leaving for Juilliard, Madison looked at the posters of famous violinists that had inspired her dreams and the corner where she had practiced for countless hours. Tomorrow she would begin the next chapter of her journey, studying with world-renowned teachers and preparing for a career as a professional musician. The girl who had once been pushed off a stage had learned to fly. Madison Carter's story had become more than just a tale of personal triumph. It had sparked conversations about bullying, inspired legislative changes, and reminded people that extraordinary talent can emerge from the most unexpected places. Most importantly, it had proven that sometimes the moments that seem designed to break us can actually become the catalysts for our greatest achievements. As she closed her bedroom door for the last time and headed toward her future, Madison carried with her the lessons learned from both her darkest and brightest moments: that resilience can overcome cruelty, that community support can heal individual wounds, and that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied. The Heinrich Roth violin, carefully packed in its case, would accompany her to New York and beyond, continuing its legacy of creating beautiful music in the hands of someone who truly understood its value. And somewhere in Connecticut, other young artists were discovering their own voices, inspired by the girl who refused to let anyone silence her song. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.